And so what we're about to do is we're about to start a new series called Kings and Kingdoms. And this series is really to show us, what does God's kingdom look like? What we want to look at is we want to look at kings and kingdoms in the Bible, and we want to show the difference between what we see within the kingdoms of this earth and what we see within the kingdom of our God. Now, here's the real battle within that, is that you are either part of God's kingdom of life, of power, of resurrection, of hope, or you are part of the kingdom of darkness, of this world. And I feel in my spirit that what we're about to step into in this series has some weight to it. What I mean by that is that to decide which kingdom that we are going to be a part of carries weight. To say that I go to church, to say that I'm a Christian, to say that I have a bumper sticker or a cross around my neck does not make you part of God's kingdom. And so what we need to look at in God's word is we need to look in and discern what is his kingdom and what does it look like. And there is a contrast of God's kingdom and the kingdoms of this earth. There's a contrast in the types of kings that are established and seated on thrones throughout the word of God, throughout history, and the type of king that God is in Jesus and how he sits upon the throne and how he rules. Now, here's what's true, is that regardless of whether you consider yourself a Christian or not, you inevitably are like this. Your life exists, and above you, there is a throne. And on that throne sits someone or something. You could say, I'm an atheist and I don't believe. It's okay. There's still someone on that throne. You could say, this is my first time stepping into church, and I'm not really sure why you would say that. I'm really in control of how I live and how I choose to live and what I do with my life. Well, that's okay, because we can put ourselves up there. We can put our spouse up there. We can put our kids up there. We can put an addiction up there. We can put pride up there. We can put wealth up there. We can put status up there. But what sits on that throne over our lives? And I want you to just take a moment before we even dive into this series of Kings and Kingdoms. And I want you to ask yourself the question, who sits on the throne over my life? Well, we'd love to say that that's Jesus. We'd love to say, if we're a follower of God, that he truly sits upon the throne over our lives. But how sad to think that we would want Christ to be on that throne, but someone else is truly on that throne. What does it look like for Jesus to be on the throne of our life? You see, the whole reason why Jesus came and was born and lived his life was to establish his kingdom. What does his kingdom look like? And why would we want Jesus to sit on that throne instead of ourselves or someone else or something else? And that's really what we're going to explore through this series of Kings and Kingdoms. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but I do have a history in politics. And actually, there was a time in my life and a season in my life where I was fully invested, in a pretty heated campaign. Actually, it was running for president. I ran for the 5th grade president of my elementary school. And I'll never forget it. It was a real heated battle. And so I had to choose a vice president, and I had to decide what my campaign was going to be about. I had to decide, what my platform was and what kinds of, policies and things I was going to bring to this school. Now, I had a big vision, man. I've always been a visionary. I've always been somebody that had, this just this big mind and this big idea of what I was going to do. And I looked around at Vestal Hills Elementary School, and I saw there was a lot of change that was needed. There was a lot of hope that these kids needed, and they needed a leader. And so I saw myself as that leader, and I got my vice president, and I got my campaign manager. We put together something really powerful, and I'll never forget it that day when I stood up in front of my school, and I had that mic in my hand. I'll never forget that bit of power that came over me, that bit of confidence that came over me as I was ready to deliver my speech. And I got up there, and I've always been somebody that's just, been comfortable in a public speaking environment, and I got up there and I brought my speech, and I'll never forget, it was just like this. Everybody's eyes were on me, all the classmates, all the teachers, everybody was looking at me, and I was in my flow. And I mean, it was delivering, man. It was landing, like they were with me. I felt like I had every single vote in the room. I felt it so strong. And right at that moment, right at that climax, I was just waiting for that moment where I had them all in my hand so I could really deliver that final blow, because I knew there was this one thing that was going to put me over the top. And I knew I needed that one thing, because when you're running for office, you need that one thing that people are looking for. And I knew what my classmates were looking for, and I knew what they wanted. And so I was just waiting, and here I had them in that moment, ready to deliver that final thing that would put me over the top. And I said, in Vestal Hills, I'm bringing vending machines to Vestal Hills, soda, snacks, and candy. And I'll never forget it. The whole room, they were like, yeah. I mean, it was like I was like leading a war of children for candy, snacks, and soda to be delivered to them. And right at that moment, I'll never forget, I had them. They were all voting for me. A teacher walked across the stage very slowly. She walked over to me. She took the mic out of my hand. She said, "There will be no snacks, candy, or vending machines." She handed the mic back to me and ruined the whole thing. And they voted for someone else. She completely destroyed my whole campaign. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the fact that we oftentimes will give ourselves to things that have promise. We will give ourselves and place things upon the throne over our lives that we're hoping will deliver a promise that they're incapable of delivering. You see, if it's true that all of us have a throne over our lives and that someone or something sits on that throne, the question is, can that person or that thing that you have on that throne, can they give you identity? Can they give you purpose? Can they give you meaning? Can they give you security? And while we might say, yeah, my family can give me a sense of purpose. Yeah, my children can give me a sense of identity as a parent. Yeah, my career can give me a sense of security in what it brings as far as wealth or provision or money or finances for my home. Here's what's scary. What about when we lose that? What about when we get that diagnosis, or we find out that we've been laid off, or we're not elected as the 5th grade president, and all our hopes, poof. And now, because we've placed our identity and our meaning and our purpose and our satisfaction in that very thing, it's gone. And now who am I? What is my meaning? What is my purpose? What's my satisfaction? What's bringing that to me? What about when you find out that your spouse cheats on you? Now, how can my marriage be that source to me? You see, there is nothing certain in this world that is capable of sitting on that throne to deliver and provide for us a consistent source of identity, purpose, meaning, and hope. Nothing is certain. And while we might grab onto things hoping that it might provide us that, it is merely a 5th grader promising vending machines with no power to do it. And so as we look at this series on kings and kingdoms, what we have to do is we have to look at the kingdoms of this world, the flaws that they have, the flaws that some of the kings that we look into have, and understand how that's pointing us to a greater king that has no flaw, that has the ability to sit on the throne of our lives and bring us what we've been looking for in all these other people or things that we have placed upon the throne. I want you to just dive in with me to look at this man. His name is King Saul, and I want you to understand that at this moment in history, the people of Israel had been brought out of captivity, out of slavery, right? They had been brought out of Egypt for hundreds of years. They had been slaves, and they had been brought out through a desert season of 40 years and into the promised land. God had given them a covenant, said, I am your God. I am your provider. I am your source of identity. I am your source of deliverance. I am your source of healing. I am your source of security. It's in me. I'm the one on the throne over you, which is why you don't need a king, because I am your king. And God so jealously wanted to be the people of Israel's king. And he, unlike any king, was able to provide them supernatural deliverance and miracles and provision and identity, all the things that we're looking for in ways that nobody else was capable of providing. And having been brought into the promised land and having brought into this place, God provides judges. And those judges bring them through a season where there's a lot of hostility, where nations are rising up against nations and people against people. And at the other side of what we read about in the book of Judges, now all of a sudden we see the people of God come together, and it says that they demanded a king. And Samuel, who was the prophet, which means God spoke to him and gave the words for the people, was very troubled in hearing the fact that they wanted a king, knowing that God was their king. And he goes to God, and Samuel says, God, I don't know what to do with these people because they're wanting a king, but you are their king. God, what am I to say to them? What am I to do with them? And God answers Samuel in 1 Samuel 8:7, and he says, do everything they say to you, for they are rejecting me, not you. And listen to this. They don't want me to be their king. There are a lot of sad words in the Bible. These might be some of the saddest and some of the most true words for us still today. They don't want me to be their king. What does it mean to be their king? What does that mean? It means that this was the one that would reign over them. And that word reign in the Hebrew means to rule over, to govern. And so God is saying, look, I am the one that's ruling over you. I'm the one that's governing you. And what is the purpose of those who rule over us or govern us? The purpose that God had established within his kingdom, which is very in contradiction to what we see typically in most kingdoms of this earth, is that God, as the one who would rule over and govern his people, would do that in a way that was so contrary to how other kings and other rulers and other leaders would rule over and govern over them. God was looking to provide ruling and governing in a way that was bringing provision and health and security and protection and deliverance and safety. And God knew that if they chose another king that was not God, but was someone else, that that person would reign, rule, govern them very differently. And so God speaks through Samuel of what it would look like for another king to govern them. And bear with me because there's a little set of scriptures here, but I think it's worth reading because it's so powerful as we realize the implications of it. So Samuel passed on the Lord's warning to the people who were asking for a king. He said, this is how a king will reign, rule over you, govern you. He said, the king will draft your sons and assign them to his chariots and his charioteers, making them run before his chariots. Some will be generals and captains in his army. Some will be forced to plow in his field and harvest his crops. And some will make his weapons and chariot equipment. The king will take your daughters from you and force them to cook and bake and make perfumes for him. He will take away the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his own. He will take a tenth of your grain and your grape harvest and distribute it among his officers and attendants. He will take your male and female slaves and demand the finest of your cattle and donkeys for his own use. He will demand 1/10 of your flocks. And listen to this. And you will be his slaves. When that day comes, you will beg for relief from the king you are demanding. Now, I know some weighty stuff. But what do we see here? We see that God recognizes the fact that if they allow someone else on the throne over their lives, other than him, that they will be a slave to that person. See here that word take over and over and over and over and over, and how that king will govern them or rule them. And why does this still matter today? Because whatever we put on the throne that Jesus is supposed to be seated on in our lives, whether that be a person, whether that be an addiction, whether that be a desire for wealth, a desire for fame, a desire, whatever that is, it will enslave us. You will become a slave to what is seated on that throne. Now, I think that as I say that, kind of silence and kind of just feeling in the room is that we understand it because we've been there. We've been a slave to the job. Why? Because we've been a slave to the way that we look. Why? Because we're so driven by how we look. It's sitting on the throne. We've been a slave. Even to good things that God gives, like our children, like our spouse. We become a slave to it. We begin to serve it. Why? Because when good things become God things, those things are bad. And they're enslaving. And in the New Testament, what we read is that God says, look, you are no longer a slave to sin, but I've called you sons, daughters, co-heirs with Christ. We need to understand that the kingdom that God came to establish looks so different than the kingdom that we see in this world. It's amazing as I read this text to hear the words from God through Samuel to say, look, your daughters will become their slave. Your sons will serve them. Your wealth, it'll all go that way. All your possessions, it will go to serve him. He will take it. He will use it. He wouldn't manipulate it. And he goes so far as to say, you will become a slave to this person that you put on the throne. You see, if we all have a throne over our lives, and we all have something on that throne, then God is saying, look, whatever that is up there, you're a slave to that. You're serving that. It is governing your thoughts. What does that mean? It is actually causing patterns to be formed within your mind because of how much you're serving that very thing or that very person that you've placed on that throne. We can't even step into that environment or that moment without thinking so much about how we look, about how we appear, about how we're going to present ourselves, about how we're going to present ourselves after we get out of that moment and post it. We have become a slave to someone or something else other than God, and we're serving it, and we're living for it, and we're desiring so badly to please it, to perform, to add up, to be enough, to look good enough, to have enough. And it saddens me to hear that warning was there, and that the people said, yeah, we hear what you're saying, but we want a king. And listen to this. God says, do as they say, and give them a king. You know, church, sometimes the judgment of God is actually giving us what we're asking for. It's giving us what we want. I think as parents, we understand that sometimes we just so desperately want our kids, to be a certain way, to act a certain way, to live a certain way, to speak a certain way. to treat others a certain way. And we're kind of going around and we're monitoring that. And when they're punching their sister, we're like, no, no, no. And when we're in the church and they're acting crazy and jumping on the seats, we don't want that. We don't want to be seen like, oh, the family that doesn't have it all together, and we're just trying to kind of get this behavior modification because we're so concerned about how our kids are acting. We want them to be a certain way. As much as we try to force our will and try to make them a certain way, we're realizing as parents, and I say we, Tara and I, 8-year-old, 5-year-old, 2-year-old, we're realizing like it's more important for us to give them the tools of how to be a good person than it is for us to just modify the way that they're behaving. It's so much more important for us to show them, like, look, this is what it looks like for you to be empowered and be the person that God has called you to be, than it is to just go around and just monitor and make sure that they're doing exactly what they want. And why is that? Because they have a will. They have their choice. They can live how they want. And as much as I can force them to be a certain way, I realize that as soon as they get outside of the fact that they are young kids that have to do what mom and dad says, they will have to choose themselves. And God, he looks at you and he sees you and he sees the desires in your heart. And he sees your desire to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized, to be someone, to be enough. He sees the things, the people that you've allowed to sit on the throne over your life. You know what? It saddens him because he will not force you. He will not force you to put him on that throne. You know what I'm so thankful about? I'm so thankful that he was patient with me. Because for so long, I allowed other things to be on that throne. And I came to church. And I worshiped God, but that was more of a song I sang than a life I lived. You know what I'm so thankful for is that he just kept pursuing me. You know what I see in the Word is I see the same thing. Except instead of it being in one life of 34 years, it's in generations of evidence of God's people turning away from him and his kingdom. Him saying, I still love you. You're still mine. You realize that's the kind of kingdom that you have the opportunity to be part of? That's the kind of king that can sit on the throne of your life. But they demanded, no, we need someone we can see. Because we get hung up on the fact that we can't see God. We can't see him with our eyes. And we want something that we can see. You know what the Bible calls that? Idolatry. The Bible calls it idolatry, where we begin to erect gods, false images that we can serve, worship, that we can give credit to for good things that happen to us, that we can ask for help when bad things happen. And yeah, it's not made of bronze, silver, or metal. It's not made of wood. But it's still evident in our culture and in America that we have so many idols. And we're demanding to have these idols. And we're demanding to have them on the throne. And we're demanding to give our time to them and our thoughts to them and our energy to them. And we're demanding them to fill us with purpose and hope and identity. And we're demanding them to be our source for those things. And they were never made to be our source for those things. And we're putting our spouse up there. And we're expecting them to provide us with that. And we're completely crushing them under the weight of expectation that they can't uphold. God is saying, there's a better king that can sit on that throne. There's a better king that has no need in himself. There's a better king that doesn't take what you have to serve his needs, but gives of himself to serve yours. There's a better king that stepped out of perfection in heaven where there was no pain and suffering, and that king came and he hung on a cross even though he did nothing wrong. Not to take what you have so that it can become a servant and a slave to him, but to take what he has to deliver you from becoming a slave to those gods, to those idols, to those people, to those things that are on that throne in your life. And yeah, we all do it. It's not so much, am I doing this? Have I done it? It's more, what is it? Who am I expecting to bring me what only Jesus can bring me? What am I hoping once I get it, I'll feel like I'm enough? Only to get it and realize I'm still not. And so they demanded, Saul, be that king. Replace God. And God said, it's because they've rejected me as their king. But you know what happens is that when we put other things or other people on the throne over our lives, what happens is that as we become enslaved, we become trained by those things or those people to perform. And then, because they were never meant to be on the throne, and they don't have the power to provide us what Jesus can provide, okay? They don't perform and provide what we're expecting them to. And so now what do? We learn how to be self-sufficient. And this is what Saul did. Samuel had said, look, when you go to make offerings, burnt offerings, go there, wait on me for 7 days, and I will come. Saul was in a really tough spot, by the way. There was an entire army of Philistines that had come by the thousands. The Bible says as many as the sand of the seashore were as many as those that were in this army coming to attack Saul in his early years within his kingship. And it says that as that attack came, and Saul was fighting and doing all that he could to fight, he realizes he had never asked God for help. And so in that self-sufficiency that he's already operating in, trying to defeat the enemy, trying to overcome him, trying to be enough to overcome the enemy, realizing that he's not enough, realizing that as much as he could put himself up on that throne and begin to resurrect monuments and idols as a way to just show people how powerful he is and how good of a king he is, and in his own insecurities, trying to operate out of his own insufficiencies, trying to be enough, all of a sudden something hits him and he remembers the prophet Samuel telling him, go offer burnt offerings at this place in this location to God, but wait on me 7 days. And what does he do? He goes to that place, and I see him here just pacing. And while he's pacing, waiting to offer the burnt offering, let's be honest, just as a way to say to God, hey God, look, I couldn't get myself out of this one, so maybe you can. And he's pacing. Day 1 passes, and he's thinking about his troops that are hiding in holes and caves. Day 2 passes, and he's thinking about all the Philistines that are going to come against him. Day 3 passes. Day 4 passes. Wait 7 days. Day 5 passes. Wait 7 days. Day 6 passes. Wait 7 days. Day 7, all of a sudden, day 7 comes, and he goes, Samuel must not be coming. He goes and he offers the burnt offering himself to God because he's not willing to wait on God, which is probably one of the first moments that we can see in Scripture where God says, because of this, Saul, your kingdom will end. Now, why would God be so strict with Saul? Why would God, doesn't God understand? Doesn't God understand that when I'm under attack and when I'm going through hard stuff, that sometimes I'm just going to need to do what I got to do? I mean, doesn't God understand that, like, I'm in a real battle right now in my life? We're going through the chemo treatments. We're going through this waiting period. The child's not coming. We're not having the baby. I'm not getting the job. I'm not having any opportunities come my way. The bills are pouring out. I mean, God gets it. He understands. God understands. I need to do what I can do here. He understands that it's okay. I know he said this in his word. I know his word was this. But God, you understand where I'm at right now. God says your kingdom will end. And to me, that's tragic. You know why? Because that means that what could have been passed on through Saul's lineage to Jonathan and all those that would come after would end with Saul. One of the greatest impacts that self-sufficiency will have is on the next generation. Church, let me tell you this. There is nothing greater that my parents provided for me than modeling what it looks like to wait on God. But what are we doing? We're waiting on God. But can't we do this? No, God's got to show us. He's got to speak. When he says it, we'll do it. I'm not a patient person, man. I got to go. I got to move. That's me. That's in my nature. It's hard to wait. It's hard to wait, isn't it? Can we be real? It's hard to be patient. It's hard to wait on God. It's hard to trust him when he said, wait on me. I'll be there. And we don't see God coming through. And so now all of a sudden we take matters into our own hands. And God says, look, this is the moment when Saul's prideful heart was revealed. You are so prideful that you believe that if you move forward with this and you act in your own strength, it will produce more than if you wait on me. Am I not the God that formed the earth with my hands? Am I not the God that brought the people out of captivity? Am I not the God that brought the 10 plagues? Am I not the God that parted the Red Sea? Am I not the God that brought manna and quail from heaven? Am I not the God that saved you, rescued you, gave you 10 commandments, brought you through time and time again where you turned away from me? And every time you turned away, I provided a judge for you. I provided a way out. I provided a liberator. Am I not the God that's seated on the throne over this situation in your life? And I feel as though he's speaking this to some people in this room right now. You are so worn down from your self-sufficiency that you have nothing left. And you are tired. And you're saying, it's just so exhausting. I'm not enough. I'm not enough here. I'm not enough here. Not enough for my wife. I'm not enough at work. I'm not enough. There's not enough time. There's not enough. I'm not enough. You know why I can say that with conviction? Because I feel that. I feel that sometimes. Oh, I'm not enough. I can't be enough. But you know what? God's okay with us admitting that. It's just, will we wait on a king who is enough? Will we wait on him? Because he's offering freedom from the need to perform. He's offering a way out. Saul was surrounded. Saul had no other plan. Saul had no idea how to overcome this enemy. He took matters into his own hands. Maybe right now you're seated in a position in your life where it just feels over, like you don't have what you need, that you're not enough. And what we would all be tempted to do is what Saul did, become self-sufficient. And God is saying, let me be the sufficient king that provides the way out. Let me be enough. I see that you're not enough. Right now, Christmas season, ooh, that's a big one. It's a big feeling. We all feel it. God is saying, it's okay to admit it. Look, I'm here. Don't lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge me. I'll make the path straight. Trust me. Now, one other thing I want to share with you that this life of Saul reveals about the kingdoms of this earth and how they are so different from the kingdom that God is offering us is not only self-sufficiency, but self-deception. A little bit later, what we see is that once again, God was gracious. He delivered them from the Philistines by an absolute miracle. But then there's another enemy, because like we all have discovered, as soon as we get past this one thing we're up against, there's the next thing. And it's like God is just always faithful to give us opportunities to believe, to trust him, to see him at work in our lives. And so the next thing was that the Amalekites had been completely brutal with God's people. You know that they were actually gouging out the right eye of all the Israelites just to completely humiliate them and make a mockery of them. But there was this little group that was left, that their eyes hadn't been gouged out yet. And Saul had heard about this, and the Bible says that the power of God fell upon Saul, and he rose up in the power and the authority of God to stand up against this enemy that was in defiance to God's people. God spoke very specifically. He said, wipe them all out. Now look, this is pretty gruesome stuff. God said, the men, the women, the babies, the livestock, the king, completely wipe out everything. And so Samuel walks in, and he's looking for Saul after this battle. And he's looking for Saul, and he can't find Saul. And he hears from someone that Saul had actually just erected a monument of himself. It's funny how when we fall into the trap of self-reliance, of depending on ourselves, right? It's funny how when we fall into this trap, how we can see that then when we get through it and we were able to withstand it, that pride comes in. It's funny that when we get through hard things and it's been really difficult and we've been completely self-sufficient and now we make it through, what do we tell ourselves? I can do this. I'm enough. I figured it out. I had the answers. I overcame it. When in all actuality, what Saul didn't know was that it was a complete miracle that God graciously spared them from the Philistines. But pride and arrogance fills our hearts when we become self-sufficient, which is one of the reasons why God so graciously wants to free us from our self-sufficiency. Because he also wants to free us from the lie that we can do it apart from him. Now, obviously, Saul had given himself over to this lie because at this moment we find him actually constructing monuments of himself to make sure that the people would remember how great a king they truly have. And it was in this moment that Samuel, the prophet, approaches Saul. And in him approaching Saul, it says, Saul greeted him cheerfully. And he says, "May the Lord bless you," he said. "I have carried out the Lord's command." What did God instruct him? wipe it all out. Everything. The king, the women, the babies, the men, everything, the livestock, wipe it all out. And Samuel says, well, then why do I hear those animals? What is this that I hear? The lowing of cattle. It's true that the army spared the best sheep, goats, and cattle, Saul admitted, but they are going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God. We have destroyed everything else. It's true that I spared the king's life, and we spared the best cattle, but look, it's all going to be given to God. And Samuel says some very profound words that I'm sure that we've all heard. He says, obedience is greater than sacrifice. You see, I don't think that Saul really was trying to fool Samuel, or else he would have hidden the animals so that they couldn't be heard. I think that Saul had actually fallen into the trap of self-deception, of believing that though it wasn't all of what God asked, it was still obedience. And what God is so clear about when he says that because of this, he rejected Saul as king and actually was upset that he ever even allowed him to become king. What God reveals is this, is that if it's not 100% obedience, it's disobedience. You know what I've been working out with my kids? First time obedience is obedience. If it's not first time obedience, it's not obedience. Hey Josh, go up and clean your room. If I gotta say that 5 times, it's not obedience, even if he goes up and cleans his room. Because I should just have to say it 1 time, then I gotta say it 5 times, so by the time he goes up to clean his room, he didn't really obey me. So thanks for letting me parent vent. Because we all get it, we've been there. And sometimes we're like, God, I did what you asked. And God said, yeah, but I asked you this so many times. Well God, I wiped out all these people. We killed it. Why would God want them to kill all? Because God was concerned with protecting his people. God was concerned with making sure that they remained his people, that they remained holy, that they remained set apart to him, that they didn't fall under the attacks, that the attacks didn't continue because they left some behind, that the people that they allowed to remain didn't rise up again and continue to defeat them and destroy them. God is a different kind of king, and he wants to completely wipe out those things that have enslaved us, church. There are generational things that have been working through our homes and families for so many years. And God is going, I want to completely change the course of your future and your children's future. If you completely obey me 100% with everything I ask you, I know it's painful. I know it's difficult. I know it's requiring a lot, but it's to protect you. It's to give you future and hope and calling. It's to heal you. It's to provide you a way out from the bondage that you've been living under. Don't you see all these men with their right eyes gouged out? Is this what you want for your children? No, you want freedom and liberation and hope for your children. God is saying, look, sometimes to walk in that freedom requires absolute 100% obedience on your part to do what God asks you to do. Some of us, we'd love for Jesus to be on that throne, but we just don't want to do all the things he's asking of us because it seems too hard, because it seems like it's too much. But Jesus is saying, look, I'm a different kind of king. And if you put me on this throne, if you put me up here, I'm not going to enslave you and use everything that you have for my benefit. I'm going to free you and use everything that I have for your benefit. God is saying, if you let me sit on this throne, I will not allow you to fall into the trap of bondage and self-deception, but I will reveal to you another layer of the onion as it peels back, and you let me go deeper, and you let me give you freedom, and you let me give you hope. And God is saying, look, I've done a lot in you, but there's more I want to do in you. I believe right now there's somebody in this room, and you know God is asking you for a certain area of obedience in your life, and you've been holding back. You've been hopeless because for so many generations it seemed hopeless. Your dad was an addict, and your dad's dad was an addict. Your dad was angry, and your dad's dad was angry. Your dad was poor, and your dad's dad was poor. Your dad was going from job to job, and your dad's dad was going from job to job. Your dad was full of lust, and your dad's dad was full of lust. And what we do is we look at our roots and our heritage and what we come from, and we use that as evidence to say to God why it can't happen and why we're justified to live continually in this bondage. And God is saying, I'm a different kind of king, and I've come to liberate you from that bondage. If you will allow me to speak directly into the strongholds that are in your life, it will require a radical obedience on your part. You're going to have to go all out for the kingdom of God. You're going to have to lay aside everything and cut off anything that stands in your way, because God has called you to a race, and that race is to launch you and project you into a purpose and a hope and a calling and a future. And I believe there's some people in this room, and you're feeling the Spirit of God right now, and He's saying, yes, this is me, this is for me, this is for my family, this is for my kids. I don't want to live in this bondage anymore. I know it's hard to cut this off. I know it's hard to make this decision. I know it's hard to be obedient, but I want to say yes to God. And God is here as a different kind of king, saying, I will empower you. I will strengthen you. I will give you what you need to walk in the freedom that only I can provide. I am the king you've been looking for. I am the king that you need on the throne over your life. If you desire, you know what? If we're going to clap, let's just clap like we mean it. Come on, let's give Him praise. Come on, Him praise. Him praise. Yeah. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? This is the invitation right now. It's for everybody. This is not, did I pray a prayer or not? No, this is much more than that. This is who or what is on the throne over your life. Well, I did ask God to be my Savior. Well, I have been in church 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We all are susceptible to allowing someone else or something else to sit on the throne of our lives. We can all fall into that trap. And God is saying, if you've been feeling not enough, if you've been feeling trapped, if you've been feeling enslaved, it might be evidence that Jesus isn't on the throne. You've allowed something else. Idolatry. Forgive us, God. Forgive us for our idol worship, God. Forgive us for elevating ourselves, for being so prideful. Forgive us for the arrogance in our hearts. And free us. You're the king we've been looking for. You're the king that stepped off your throne to free us, to provide a way out of slavery. You're that king. May we not go on living enslaved when you've already provided a way out. You are that king. We desire to be part of your kingdom, but we only are if you're on the throne. So God, I pray that you would reveal the idols in our life, the pride, self-exaltation, the desire to be seen, the need to be enough. Lord, I pray, may we be honest with you so that you can heal us and forgive us. And once again, provide a way out. Once again, provide a way out. If you're here and you've got something else on that throne other than Jesus, We can all do it. Would you stand to your feet right now? Thank you, Jesus. Oh, God. This is not about anyone else in the room. This is about you and your heart. You know, so much of what I see Saul doing is being led by people, being dictated by the opinions of others, by the need for approval. And you could be sitting here doing the same thing, being dictated by those that might see you, observe you, look at you. God is saying, just forget all that. Let this be a moment that's sacred, personal. And if just one person stood with that heart to acknowledge their desire to allow Jesus to be on that throne again, it would be enough. It would be worth it. This is personal. And so, God, we're asking you to bring our hearts upward and out of that place of self-condemnation and self-sufficiency, self-deception, out of that place of slavery and into that place of freedom. God, we thank you that your kingdom is different and that you're a different kind of king. And we thank you for that. Jesus, we thank you that we don't need to depend upon ourselves to produce, to perform, or to be enough, because you are the King that's seated over the throne of our lives, and you're enough. You're a good King, and you love us enough to show us the truth about how we really are right now. And so, God, we lift our hands to you. Church, would you lift your hands? And God, we say, forgive us, God. I just want to ask you to join with me, and I just want to ask you to just cry out to God right now in this place and just ask him for forgiveness, because this is where it all begins. God was saying that the king that would replace Saul would be a king that is after his own heart. And this is where we're going next week. That what it looks like to be someone that's after God's heart is that we're willing to admit when we're wrong. We're willing to admit when we've failed. We're willing to admit when we're not enough. We're willing to get on our knees and cry out to God and ask him to forgive us. We're willing not to make excuses for it anymore and just to try to justify what we've done that's been wrong, but to say, God, there's no reasoning that I have for this, but other than to say, God, forgive me, cleanse me, purify me, wash me. Thank you that you've pursued me. Thank you that you were a different kind of king that went to a cross to die for me, God, so that I didn't have to be enough, because you're enough, God. Your sacrifice was enough, God. Your holiness is enough, God. Your righteousness is enough, God. Lord, I pray that you would break the strongholds of slavery that have kept people in bondage, Lord. And I pray that they would walk in the freedom that you provide them today, Jesus. You are the King. You are on the throne. You are leading us to the promised land. You are leading us to a life of abundance. You are establishing your kingdom here on this earth. You are the good God that loves us, that gives us hope and purpose and meaning and identity, God. Forgive us for looking to other things to try to fulfill what only you can fulfill. We thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah, Jesus. Praise you, Lord. Can we sing this? I wanna sit at your feet, drink from the cup in your hands, lay back against you and breathe, and feel your heartbeat. This love is so deep, it's more than I can say. God, we thank you that you are the God, that you are the source, that you are the life, that you are the King, that you are the promise, that you are the hope of all that we need. Jesus, I pray that you would teach us to wait on you, to seek you. And God, that you would keep us in this place of peace. Thank you, Jesus, that you are a different kind of King. That as we look ahead toward Christmas, and that you came to be the King that would make everything right, that there's hope, that there's a way out, that there's healing, and that there's freedom, and that it's found in you. We love you, Jesus. We praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
We hope this message has given you the evidence to see how God is already working in your life. He has more for you. Keep moving forward. And thank you for giving. It's because of you that we're able to reach more people. To give, you can go to calvaryslove.org/give. You can download our Calvary's Love Church app, or you can text the word give and the amount to the number 607-228-8868. And hey, don't forget to share this message with someone you know.